Boy, they have these scattered around here, don't they? Closer here.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, open it for discussion. That's good. That's fine.
Things don't look very good, and you're part of the world right now.
Yeah. That's. I'm going back actually to Abuja in 2 days under the peace negotiations.
So
Coming.
Jan's,
Yeah, Jan. What it was difficult. Yeah. This was difficult. No.
When you and I met in the meeting
Yeah.
in Geneva, I
Yeah.
guess it was,
Yeah.
what was your role at that moment?
I was working for the United Nations Environmental Program for these post-conflict areas, and I was that time heading to Great Lakes.
That's right.
Remember, but it never actually took place because Sudan took over. Sudan took over.
I was really surprised.
And
to
now
see
I'm in the
you
European
worked in
Union,
this
and
area.
actually I changed the organizations. That time I was UN, United Nations, now I'm European Union. So that's,
One of my closest allies, working associates, allies, friends
Yeah.
over the years is Aldo
yeah.
Yellow.
Yeah. His office is in front of my,
we
yeah.
were very close.
Yeah. That's good.
Partnered together for
Yeah,
many years.
No.
Should we start?
Yeah, we can start. Yeah.
Good morning. First of all, let me welcome everyone and also extend apologies. The construction on the bridge interfered with my more timely arrival, so I'm sorry for the delay in starting this morning's program. I also, just by way of introduction, for those of you who may be new to the Wilson Center, the center is a nonpartisan institution established by Congress back in 1968 as the living memorial to President Woodrow Wilson. It is designed as an institution that tries to bring together the world of ideas, or the world of public policy, and to encourage debate, reflection, research on all issues, both global and national. We are delighted today to welcome to the center Pekka Haavisto, who he and I actually became acquainted some months ago when he was in another capacity, working at that time for the United Nations Environmental Program. He is the former Finnish Minister for Environment and Development Cooperation, a former member of the Finnish Parliament, and I understand, are you still a member of the local politics of the Helsinki City Council? He has served as a spokesman for the European Greens. He chaired the United Nations Environmental Program's environmental assessments to Kosovo, Serbia, Montenegro, Afghanistan, excuse me, and the occupied Palestinian territories. In March of 2003, he was invited as the chairman for UNEP's Iraq Task Force, and in December in 2003 as the chairman of UNEP's Liberia Task Force. He served as an advisor to the United Nations Secretariat of the Convention to Combat Desertification, and as a member of the Heinrich Böll Foundation Joburg Memo team prior to the Johannesburg 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development. He's also a member of the UN Millennium Task Force. In July of 2005, Mr. Haavisto was appointed as the first European Union Special Representative for Sudan. His visit here is obviously timely, particularly in light of some of the very recent developments just this past week and some difficulties that the international community is having in engaging the government of Sudan. So with that, I'm delighted to welcome you here once again. You've been there at the center in the past, and look forward to your remarks.
Thanks, Howard, and thanks for this opportunity of being here again. When people were asking where I'm coming from and where I'm going to, the answer is that I'm coming from Khartoum and I'm going to Abuja, and maybe this is the shortest route. You know, the Africa connections are sometimes bad, so it's always you have to take a little bit detour. But seriously speaking, I really I'm here mainly for the meetings in the State Department in Washington, and also some meetings in the New York with the DPKO on the blue hatting and hopefully coming UN peacekeeping mission in Darfur, and really going them back to Abuja talks, which I've been following on the behalf of European Union. And really before coming here, I had a two days stop in Khartoum and followed quite closely the Egeland issue, and others. Had also a meeting with the Vice President and a couple of Sudanese ministers, so heard, so to say, their point of view to current issues. But since I promised to talk a little bit European Union's activities in the region and also the international responses to the Darfur crisis, I think I start from the beginning. And I made some weeks ago to my mother and to some of her friends a slideshow explaining her what I'm working for. So now I translate it to English, and I'm testing the same to you. My mother liked it, so I hope you like it too. I think when we look the goals of international community in Darfur and ending the conflict in Darfur, of course, the end of conflict is a value as such. The security, safe return of the IDPs and refugees is our goal there. Disarmament, the whole DDR process, reconstruction, also reconciliation in the society is our goal. We know that the social structure or the social fabric of Darfur has been damaged very badly by this conflict. Restoring the human rights, freedom of expression, free press is important. The census, this kind of very technical issue, is very important to prepare the elections, to decide who can vote and who cannot vote. Actually, there's a lot of claims that there are foreign soldiers in Darfur coming from the neighboring countries in these troops and so on. It's very important to clarify who are actually the Darfurians and who are not Darfurians. And also this issue is very important for the whole Sudan, of course. Forming political parties. Now the movements, the rebels are speaking how to turn their militant groups or activities towards civil activities, to form them as a political groupings. Free elections, of course. Ending of unofficial or the touch of the unofficial or official security organizations. You know, Sudan is a difficult country, of course, because there is not currently really a democratical structures. We hope that there will be through the free elections, but there are 2 or 3 different kind of security organizations having their hand quite strongly on the developments. And of course this is what the movements are raising up time to time, that these organizations are not helpful, of course, for restoring peace in Darfur. And then the issues like transparency in administration and budgeting, very essential, of course, not only for Darfur but the whole Sudan. I think these are the goals the whole international community, we in European Union, US and others are working for in Darfur and in Sudan. The importance of Sudan, of course, comes from the fact that it's the biggest, geographically the biggest country in Africa, around 40 million inhabitants, but also that it's in this kind of point where you have both Arab and African cultures, population, and religions, Muslims in the north, Christians and traditional religions in the south. All these are very important for the whole Africa, because Sudan is not the only country that have this composition. Actually, in countries like Nigeria or in Ethiopia and others, you have also the similar setting. And if something happens to Sudan, for example, if it breaks according to the ethnic lines or according to the religious lines, it probably this negative development will not stop there. It's affecting to the neighboring countries and so on. And of course the issue of the oil resources. I know that there are people who always think that international community is only working and acting there where there are oil resources. Well, in Sudan there are oil resources, even in Darfur, in the southern part, there are some oil resources. But I would say this has not been currently the main topic for the international community. It's important actually for the southern Sudan currently for the reconstruction and getting the proper part of the oil revenues. But of course this brings many actors to Sudan. China is very active on the oil sector. Many Asian powers are active there and so on. Not so much currently for obvious reasons, the Western companies. Sudan also has many neighbors, and when you look the neighbors and you look their role, you have Ethiopia there, who certainly influences to Sudan, but north of Ethiopia you have Eritrea, which really has its hand on the rebel movements, both in the eastern front, which is close to Eritrean border, but also in the western part in Darfur. There are rumors of training camps, economic support to the rebels, and so on. So what Eritrea thinks about peace in Darfur or peace in Sudan is quite essential, because it can influence to the positive or negative direction in the country. Currently, unfortunately, we see more the negative influence for Eritrea, who does not think that the peace agreement between North and South is functional and actually encourages the movement in Darfur not to sign any peace agreement. Egypt, earlier in the history, Sudan was part of Egypt. The Egypt relationship is very sensitive, of course, for many reasons. Part of the Sudanese refugees are there. Libya, that certainly has been supporting the rebel movements, but as you know, Gaddafi's new policies is very much in favor of building the peace, in favor of this kind of African unity, African independence and African proudness, so to say. And I have to say that Gaddafi recently has played, at least in some issues, quite constructive role on Chad-Sudan border issue and so on. We have Chad. It's maybe not exaggerating to say that it's collapsing. President Deby is in a very weak position, and the Darfur conflict is spreading over to the Chadian side, and maybe the Chadian conflict to the Darfurian side, and it's this whole the border issue between Chad and Darfur is a very difficult one, and currently the humanitarian work is most difficult close to the Chadian borders due to all these military activities. We almost on the daily basis can read about those. There's Central African Republic, there is the Democratic Republic of Congo, there is Uganda. With the Uganda, there is, for example, the Lord Resistance Army issue, which is working over the border. Not easy factor, particularly affecting to the southern Sudan, and of course Kenya. Then, so it's a big country, but also with a lot of neighbors, which all have their influence in the politics of Sudan. And of course, the conflicts that we have been reading and we have been following are the North-South civil war that luckily ended. The Naivasha Agreement 2005. There was the so-called Comprehensive Peace Agreement (CPA). I learned that Salva Kiir was here speaking to you, so you certainly have learned everything. And when he has been describing the developments, but international community is very concerned about the slow implementation of this Naivasha agreement. And this, of course, the international attention for years was very much concentrated on the North-South confrontation and how to end this civil war in Sudan. But then the conflict of Darfur has been at the, so to say, in the active phase for a couple of years, and there is the peace talks in Abuja in Nigeria, which are now going on their 7th round. And when you say that you are at the peace talks, which are at the 7th round, it already gives the impression that it's not very successful so far. It has been taking time, it has been taking energy, there has been many ups and downs in these peace talks. I will describe you a little bit later where I think we are currently now. The problem with these peace talks is that violence is at the same time continuing on the ground in Darfur. There has been a ceasefire agreements which are not respected, and there is, as we know, the African Union AMIS operation, which is not capable or equipped to stop these violations on the ground, or mandated to use really force to stop these violations. And then the issues of the Eastern Sudan, where the rebel movements are supported clearly by Eritrea, Beja Congress and Free Lions are somehow in the pocket of Asmara, where Asmara can also play with the situation in the east, but certainly situation there is deteriorating. SPLM is, according to the agreement, withdrawing their troops, according to the peace agreement, withdrawing their troops from the eastern front, and this will create maybe some kind of security vacuum, which of course government of Sudan will fill, and we probably see more military activities from these movements in the close future, which can create a new hotspot in Sudan, which is a very, very unfortunate development. And I think we should make our utmost when concentrating to Darfur also to give clear signal that we are not tolerating a new conflict to break up in the east. North-South peace agreement during the 21 years civil war, 1.5 million casualties, 4 million refugees, and then finally the comprehensive peace agreement with the wealth sharing, including the oil revenue issues, which is of course the major source of income also for the South. Power sharing, for example, the first vice president, Salva Kiir, and for the South, and then the security, which included the joint integrated units and the forming of the separate army for the South, the SPLA. And then, of course, the very unfortunate accident. First Vice President John Garang, the first Vice President, died in a helicopter crash in July 2005. Always when there is a helicopter crash in Africa, you always ask, well, what was the reason for this crash? But according to the investigations, there is an understanding that this was an accident, but of course very, very unfortunate timing. And we saw immediately after this crash also some unrest around the Khartoum when those Southerners who are living in the suburbs of the Khartoum protested, and of course we're thinking that this is a plot by the Northerners, and they cannot anymore believe that there's a goodwill from the Northerners' side to implement the peace agreement and so on. All this a very unfortunate moment. And the challenges for this comprehensive peace agreement, of course, is what is the presence of the Southern Sudan in Khartoum. Many people say that Salva Kiir, as a first vice president, is more concentrating to the south and not so much bringing the southern influence to Khartoum on the overall Khartoum policies. The issue of the transparency of the oil income remains an issue. There are many figures. There are the official figures, but there is a question also about the unofficial oil figures. Is everything in the books, and where all oil money is running? It remains a main challenge. Forming of the integrated units between the North and South is still pending. It was agreed in the peace agreement, but we have not seen very rapid development on this issue. Referendum in 2011. There should be a referendum actually for the South to decide whether they stay as a part of the United Sudan or they choose the independence. And if you put people to vote today in the Southern Sudan, they definitely will vote for the independence. They are fed up with the North for the slow implementation of the CPA and so on. And if your goal as international community is to try to keep Sudan united, you really should act so that before 2011 the opinions in the South will turn more favorable to keep country as a whole. The safe return of the IDPs and refugees has been rather slow to the South, and also the reconstruction, or some people say that there's nothing to reconstruct, you have to construct everything from the beginning, has been rather slow. And this comprehensive peace agreement has also influence to Darfur and to Darfur talks. When the Darfur rebels are asking, should we sign an agreement with the government of Sudan, they are asking how government of Sudan is following the earlier agreements, the comprehensive peace agreement. And when they see this slow progress on the CPA implementation, they become very critical. They are asking directly, will we be fooled if we sign also with the same government as the Southerners? And this is the dynamics which is not very helpful also around the Darfur crisis. Of course, in the Darfur conflict, the elements, we have the population in the villages and the permanent habitation versus the nomads, Arab nomads. There has been traditional nomadic culture, of course, in Darfur, and the government of Sudan has used part of these Arab nomads, armed Arab nomads, Janjaweed, against the villages, attacking the villages, making the revenge attacks when the rebels have been using these villages, and so on. And all this mess has created a huge refugee flow, 2 million IDPs or refugees in Darfur. And the whole dynamics of this, of course, has, as I said, also violated the social structures in Darfur. When you ask how did the nomads earlier cope with the villages, people say that, well, there was a traditional ways of negotiating. When you go to the areas and to the tribal leaders and to the villages, you negotiate your route with the camels and your route to the feeding areas and to the wells and so on. But after these violent attacks against the villages. Of course, also the villagers are blocking the routes for the nomads and trying to prevent their access to the wells and so on. And maybe here I come make a connection to my previous life when working as a environmental minister and for UNEP, actually why these Arab nomads in that part of Africa are coming more and more to the southern parts is of course part of the desertification problems, and actually they are also looking for new areas for their cattle and so on, and the problem is not coming down, it's escalating due to these climatic changes and others in Africa. Actually a very important thing, the drought and others to keep in mind. And of course Darfur is a big area. It's the size of France, or somebody said when I was coming here it's 1/4 of the United States. It's maybe better to say that way, but this gives you the scale that we are not speaking about a small tiny area, but geographically a very big area, which also gives you all the problems when you are trying to implement a peace deal or trying to plan a peacekeeping mission. You are planning it in a huge geographical area. And as you here see, it's the western part of the Sudan, bordered by Chad and Libya and Central African Republic. I think I saw this already to you. This is in there maybe. Okay. Then assistance by the international community. What we are doing currently, or international community, including all the Western powers and so on, we are actually running maybe the biggest humanitarian operation in the history in Sudan and in Darfur, with the food aid, with the medicine aid to the people, assistance to these camps, 2 million people as refugees and IDPs. And of course everybody knows that it's the most expensive way to keep people alive, to keep them in the camps where they cannot do their everyday life and earn their everyday living and just wait when the possibility to return back to the villages is. So it's in that sense a waste of resources, because these same resources could be used for the reconstruction already to these villages. When we are offering the schooling for the children or the medical care for people in the camps, there's a good question why we are not already offering these services in the villages where these people actually originally live at, and we are making temporary arrangements. We should instead of that help them in the permanent development efforts. And of course the peace talks are led by the African Union. There are some misspellings. I can tell this was done quite rapidly. The peace talks led by the African Union in Abuja, Nigeria. We are as international community, as partners in these peace talks, supporting African Union in these and giving our full support. And African Union has the peacekeeping operation with 7,000 men in Darfur. Actually, it was mandated as an observer mission for the humanitarian ceasefire, and the task of the AMIS has been growing, of this peacekeeping operation has been growing and growing and growing. European Union is one of those who are supporting African Union both on the talks and on this peacekeeping operation. United States is there, Canada is there, Norway, other players as well in this same, supporting the same portfolio. From our side, when people are always, taxpayers are asking how much we are spending, we are always telling that we have been used for the humanitarian assistance almost 300 million euros, and it's divided through the ECHO, the humanitarian agency, a little bit like USAID for the European Union, not only in Darfur but also for the refugees in Chad, and then another portfolio helping the food aid and food security issues in Darfur. Half maybe to the refugees and then to the food aid and security. And then of course the other portfolio is to support the African Union AMIS mission. We have so far been supporting it with 162 million euros. We also have some military staff on the ground, military observers, civil policemen, and military experts seconded to African Union mission AMIS. It has been, by the way, quite an uphill battle to find. People always speak about conflict resolutions and support to this, but when you ask from the member states in European Union, would you like to put your soldiers or your policemen or your civil policemen in these kind of circumstances? People are living in the camps, they are not good drinking water services, or not even always a regular food services. For the African Union aim is you have to live at the same conditions. It's very difficult to find voluntary people for this. And when people are saying, well, we should help, we should send people, we should send personnel, it's not easy task. And of course, everybody has to go there voluntarily. You cannot order anyone to go to this kind of circumstances. And also, it's not only the circumstances, but of course the tasks are quite difficult, and the security risks still quite high for the international personnel on the ground. This is some of the pictures which were made with our policemen supporting the African Union police operations, also in the camps in Darfur. And I was very proud, by the way. I think the far left is our Finnish police lady, Lena, and I asked what is she doing in the camps. She had organized the gender network for women policemen, or police women, how do you say it, first, and who are supporting then the ladies in the camps and working with the ladies. Of course, there are rape cases and there is gender-based violence cases and all this. So it was quite interesting that, first of all, there are African police women from African Union troops, and they accepted this kind of gender-based support and this kind of to be formed there. I was very proud of hearing that, because the circumstances are extremely difficult. So it was very good to hear that even in these difficult circumstances, this kind of work could be done in Darfur. And then we have the African Union peacekeepers, and of course they are coming from many African countries, more than 20 African countries. Of course, there are some countries that are particularly providing bigger amount of the troops, like Nigerians. We also have here Rwandan peacekeepers and others. So from our perspective, from exotic backgrounds or backgrounds where the conflict has just ended and so on. And of course, they have the language problem. Some people are coming from the French and some from the English part, and of course there are many other languages in Africa, and they have the chain of command problems and whatever problems you can have when you, for the first time, actually, as African Union, establish this size of the troops. But my feeling, when there is a question, is African Union and its aim is making the difference? I'm always saying, look, this is the first operation they are doing in this scale. They learn as they go. They are working in the extreme difficult circumstances. I think UN could not have sent, with this kind of rapid time scale, 7,000 people on the ground with such a poor logistics and difficult circumstances. I think African Union should be quite proud of what they are doing there. And what they have been able to do is to give the support, particularly in the IDP camps and for the refugees in the area. Of course, with the 7,000 men, you cannot cover the whole area. But I think there's no reason for African Union to be ashamed of the operation. And secondly, we shouldn't be too critical when we. I think when looking the truth, there was nobody else offering the troops than African Union. So what was the alternative? There's no alternative on this so far. Of course, now we speak then if there's a UN can take over and there can be a transition towards the UN. We will discuss that a little bit later. African Union is using helicopters, which are, of course, needed. The logistics is very bad. You know, when this kind of wet seasons and you have sandy airfields in the wet season, you cannot land with the normal plane at all. There's no actually airports. Or functional airports, but their problem, of course, is the fuel support and all this to the helicopters. These are, by the way, Russian helicopters hired by Canadians and then given to AMIS. So they have Russian pilots. It's a interesting fact. And there in the down picture, you see what government of Sudan is doing. It's painting its helicopters white, and here it's just putting the AMIS sticker on its helicopter. So to find the security for government of Sudan troops, they take the same color and same stickers as the AMIS, which is the most dangerous thing for the peacekeepers to happen, that somebody from one of the parties are masking itself as a peacekeeper. This was, by the way, the story by Milosevic in Kosovo. I remember when the Organization of European Security, OSCE, had its white cars with the OSCE text in Kosovo It took some time, and you find Milosevic's paramilitias driving with the white cars with this kind of text, and then the OSCE decided to paint them orange. And then it took 2 weeks, and you see the first orange cars with the paramilitias. So this is the game going all over, but of course most dangerous for the African Union, because then the rebel side cannot anymore be sure if it's really an Amis helicopter that is coming, or if it's the government of Sudan helicopter. These are the, I don't say lovely guys, but the guys who we are dealing with on the rebel side. They all have, of course, also their baggage regarding the human rights and the violations on the ground. I think if I have now put a little bit burden on the government side, I have to say that this conflict has been continuing and got such a forms that nobody is innocent on these leaders. You have and the upper picture, Mr. Khalil Ibrahim from the Justice and Equality movement. His movement is, so to say, from this more Islamistic background. He's not so much liked by the international community for this reason. There are many people who think that there's enough Islamism already around, and this is not helpful. Anyhow, Jem and his movement has been in the Abuja peace talks one of the most constructive group, going to the details in the talks and bringing actually the intellectual capacity from the rebel side to the talks. Of course, the big problem is that from the government of Sudan you have the best lawyers and best intellectuals, and from the rebel side you have sometimes guys from the bushes who have never been earlier running peace talks, or don't know what is this about, and have their doubts, and you have to have also training as you go, which is sometimes very difficult. Here on the right you have the other SLM leaders. So SLM is a movement, Sudan Liberation Movement, that has been breaking in two parts. Mini Minawi, who is from the Zagawa tribe, and then picture in the down you have Abdul Wahid. Already they have also differences. Mini Minawi is saying, first he was saying, we need to find a military solutions. What we learned from the southern Sudan is that when you control your area militarily, then the government takes you seriously. Abdul Wahid is a man of peace. He says we have to turn to women's movements, to academicians, to civil society. We have to unite these people for the freedom of Darfur. You have in one movement that has split two totally different logistics and ideas of peace and maybe how to get to the peace. All these three guys happily are now in Abuja in the peace talks. Some of them cannot stay in the same room, unfortunately. So this gives a feeling it's not a united front. We are dealing with the very split movements, but anyhow these are the people who have the guns and at least some control over the guns in Darfur. So we have to deal with them. Well, this was one of my exciting moments in last October when I was with Mini Minawi's rebels in Darfur, and I have to say that I learned a lot. We were sitting 4 or 5 hours under the tree like you do in Darfur, and my basic question is, what are you fighting for? And why don't you, because that time they didn't join the talks and Mini Minawi was on the ground, and some of these guys said, look, we are not only wanting to throw out the government of Sudan, but we want to throw out all the corrupted governments of Africa. And what is African Union? It's a bunch of corrupted governments. So I felt very much this kind of Che Guevara feeling, I have to say there, this kind of really revolutionary tendencies. But then after these 4 hours, 5 hours, we came more back to the ground. What are your real goals and others? And it was very interesting because I was there with some of the African Union soldiers who just accompanied me but stayed silent. And the rebels were very, very critical towards the African Union because it's an organization of the governments. They said they cannot rely, that African Union is an unbiased mediator and so on. And by the way, these African Union soldiers, they are here only for the money. They get $90 per day. That's their only motivation to come to the Darfur. And these guys have been staying silent for 4 hours, but then in the end, when we were leaving, they said, sorry, sir, we would like to say something. And then one of them said, look, I'm a medical doctor. My home is, I think, in Ghana. I have a family. I was thinking that you rebels, you needed somebody to protect your people in the camps. We were thinking that you needed somebody to look what kind of human rights violations are ongoing in Darfur, and that was my motivation to come. And now you are saying that we are coming here only for the money. That's insulting me. And it was very, very interesting because the whole dynamics turned. Then people, no, we don't mean you, we think there are good people also among the African, but some others and so on. But it was very, this kind of processes are needed. It's funny, but this kind of grassroots processes in the peace process are part of getting to understanding, because I'm sure that these 40 people who with their Kalashnikovs or whatever came to meet us, certainly they told the story to others again, what were discussed, what kind of people they met, what we think that was the African Union intentions and so on. And of course we were not the only ones from European Union who did this. Americans, you have very good Ambassador Roger Winter, for example, who have been dealing quite a lot on the ground on these issues, much more longer time than some our people. About the Janjaweeds, we have a problem because these Arab militia, we don't see them on the ground. They in the Abuja, they are on the ground. They are the ones used by the government of Sudan, attacking the villages, sometimes together with the Air Force, Sudanese Air Force. The problem with them is that movements are thinking that government should represent them in the negotiations. You were working for the government gave you the arms, we are not accepting you to come to the negotiations. Government of Sudan has to represent you, Khartoum has to represent you. At the same time, Khartoum is saying, look, maybe we arm these people or not, but they are not in our hands. And I feel very much that when you create a monster, then you create a monster, and the monster goes its own way, and you don't control it anymore. And this is what has happened with part of the Janjaweeds. That I think Khartoum is also quite serious, that some of them, these people, are now out of the control, even if they have done some services to the government. There is this big debate whether there is a genocide or not in Darfur. And as you know, United Nations made a special committee investigate that, and I think their resolution was that it's not a genocide, but there was some signs of genocide, or some features that the typical situation of genocide has. Anyhow, they listed 59 potential criminals, this kind of closed list that was never published. This was given to ICC, the International Criminal Court. And everybody in Khartoum, the name of the game is to ask, do you think if I'm on the list or not? People try to find so this gives me an impression that this kind of list have some effect. People are a little bit afraid that they are on the list. By the way, if it's a list of 51, it's very likely that many of those who are asking are on the list. And then there is the possibility to use the UN sanctions against the individuals. Currently in New York, this discussion is ongoing. We know that there are countries like Russia, Qatar, China, who are not in favor of this listing individuals, preventing them to getting passports or bank accounts and traveling and so on. But this is, of course, a possibility that UN can use. And then we know that the International Criminal Court is already investigating some Lord Resistance Army cases in the south. It has five people listed, or 5 leaders from the Lord Resistance Army, and it's now investigating some of the Darfur issues. ICC is working, it's having its own timetable. You cannot politically influence it too much. It has its own mandate and so on, but it's important to know that factor is also ongoing. And when people in Khartoum saw, I was there when the Charles Taylor was captured, when they saw the picture in TV, the Charles Taylor surrounded by UN soldiers, I got a feeling that many people in Khartoum were starting to think that, well, it seems that the international community is serious on some of these cases. It was quite strong signal in Khartoum. With the refugees, we have 2 million refugees in the camps, as said. Currently, safe return is almost impossible. In camps, people are getting the schooling and medical care for their children. There's, by the way, this typical issue that then some people are asking, well, why should we return to the villages? Because our children are getting the schooling here in the camps. And if I go to the village, there's no schooling or the basic medical care. And then international communities sometimes criticize, look, you gave too high standards for these refugees because now they don't want to return to the villages. And when you ask this from the International Red Cross, for example, they say, look, we have only one standard for human beings. They have to get these basic services. We cannot think that in some part of the world people are not having the right for the schooling for their children, and some other parts they have. We have only one standard. But this makes a lot of pressure to the international community to work when the returning of the refugee happened, that these children are not dropping out of the school, or the basic medical care is still there. Of course, in the camps, the usual story, rebels and movements are using them as a recruitment basis. There are a lot of bitter people, there are a lot of youngsters without parents or lost their parents, and others. It's a very easy ground, of course, to recruit more supporters. And then there's this urbanization process. If you go to the camp close to El Fasher, people start to build their earlier it was tents, now it starts to be stone houses, small stone houses, and when you asked about the future, they say, well, maybe the elder generation goes back to the village, but the younger generation stays close here to El Fasher because there is the labor market, they maybe find their income more, so you have a huge urbanization going on in Darfur, which is one of the factors also. Well, this is something, this was earlier, but this is very, very up to date now, the demonstrations against the UN. These were in Nyala in Darfur, and this is actually the feeling that the government is currently trying to raise up. It doesn't like the blue hatting, it doesn't like the UN to come in Darfur. It sees fears for the international intervention, and this is I would say very recent dynamics which is not very helpful. We saw the Jan Egeland case when he was refused to land first in the south and then continue to Darfur and so on. We have all the problems there, and this is one of the key challenges now for the international community, how to deal with the serious peacekeeping operations when the country where you should do it seems to oppose it fiercely or making campaign, because this increases the risks on the ground for the peacekeepers and for the UN. Then Mr. Chairman, will summarize something on the peace talks in Abuja, and then we can go to the discussion part. As mentioned, peace talks are led by Ambassador Salim. Salim, I would say very skillful, old diplomat, politician from Tanzania, and many partners are supporting, among them European Union. You have the three sectors, wealth, power, security, in these talks. In the wealth sharing, I would say we are quite close. The draft protocol is almost ready. The pending issues are compensations. The rebels are still asking individual compensations for the families. They say, look, we have 600,000 families as IDPs and refugees. Each of them should get $1,000. And we actually more than government of Sudan from the international community are saying, look, this is no way. We are not paying individual compensations. We can pay and come for paying the reconstruction and so on, but not going to the individual compensations. The allocation formula, how these different benefits are going to which areas and so on, and the percentages, how big share of the national income or national budget Darfur should get. All these are still pending, but I think these could be solved in one day if there is a political will in Abuja. The second issue is the power sharing. The issues now discussed in Abuja, will there be a region, one region or three states? The government wants 3 states to remain. The rebels want one region. This is a pending issue. The government seems to be quite hard on this. There's the issue of the borders of Darfur. It seems that there can be a consensus that the area of Darfur will be a little bit widened towards the north, towards the 1st of January 1956 boundaries. The presidency, the movements are asking a vice president for Darfur. Together the SPLM and the Northerners are saying, no way, there are already enough vice president Taha, first vice president Salva Kiir. The maximum you can get is something like assistant to president or something like that, or senior assistant to president. Movements are still wanting the position of vice president. They also discuss what is their representation in the Khartoum state, because they think that the capital Khartoum is common for the whole country, so they should have in its administration and its governance some role. They are discussing about the amount of the ministers, parliamentarians for the rebels in the capital, and then of course the Darfurian representation in the civil services in Darfur. What is their role? What will they get, and so on. All these percentages, who will be named, all these are discussed under the power sharing. And then finally, but maybe the most difficult part, the security in the Abuja talks. There is now the enhanced humanitarian ceasefire agreement tabled by African Union. It includes the disengagements of the troops. Actually now the troops are drawing the maps of their locations. This has been, by the way, a long demand also from the government of Sudan. We don't know who these people are. We don't know where the rebels are. We cannot control the Janjaweed if we don't know where the rebels are. We need to know the maps. And now, finally, the movements are drawing the maps. The redeployment, The areas where troops can be monitored by AMIS, this is now under discussion. For some of the movements it's easy, for some it's difficult. I think Minami has this kind of Toyota army. You are not permanently controlling maybe a very, very small part, but you can move easily. You are controlling some roads, some wider areas with this kind of movable troops. How to draw the map, how to, so to say, draw the mini Minawi land in Darfur. It's a challenge. This is what is now ongoing just now in Abuja. The Janjaweed issue, how pressure the government of Sudan to take care of the Janjaweed problem, that is according their responsibly also in the enhanced humanitarian ceasefire proposal. Protection of civilians, there is an idea for AMIS having the more robust mandate for that. Security of humanitarian supply routes, that there should be demilitarized routes for humanitarian supplies. And then something that is called bridging provisions, bridge to the final security arrangements like integration of combatants to the government troops. Some of the rebel movements should be merged with the government troops, disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, these DDR issues. All these are now in this package of the enhanced humanitarian ceasefire. This is just now these days discussed, so if you will see news on Saturday that the Vice President Taha will arrive to Abuja or that African Union key leaders like President Obasanjo, the Congo president from Congo will be in Abuja, I wouldn't be surprised, because there is now ongoing pressure that these key issues of the enhanced humanitarian ceasefire can be solved in Abuja soon. The challenges are still remaining. Disarming the Janjaweed, as said, it's government of Sudan responsibility. Zones of redeployment, rebels have problems. Controlling of the IDP camps, government wants to have control inside the IDP camps. Humanitarian community don't like this idea. Rebels don't like this idea. Government of Sudan is saying, well, if it's in the government territory, we have to get also this internal policing and other duties in camps. Of course, the people in the camps don't like the idea either, if you ask them. Sudan and Chad border, as said, it's a problem. There was an agreement in Tripoli between President Deby and President Bashir recently, but government of Sudan actually used it a little bit as a kitchen door, saying that, look, we have a deal in Tripoli for the border. Some of the movements are also on that border, and now government is saying there has to be this kind of border zone which is controlled by the government. And of course, in the end game, it makes sense that government controls its own sovereign borders. But now, to push the movements out from that sector just at this moment with this making another agreement with the neighboring state, and so it's a little bit complicated issue, and also the implementation of this is still pending. Merging of the rebel troops to Sudan armed forces, for some of the rebels this is an important issue, because if you have been living your whole life as some kind of member of militia, and then comes the peace, what is your future? You don't have any other profession. And the government of Sudan, on the other hand, said, look, we don't want these tribal militias to our army. If you are in colonel in the rebel movement, you are not same level, you are not colonel in our army, or we don't want these kind of tribal problems to come into our army. You have all these arguments back and forth. I think here the government of Sudan has to show some flexibility. And then the Darfur talks, which actually is problem for the both sides in one way. Who should be invited to this kind of Darfur talks, dialogue that they have agreed, reconciliation process to decide about the reconstruction, taking the tribes in, taking the civil society in, women's movements, academicians, all these in. Darfur talks certainly will start. Now the proposal is that it will start under the guidance or chairmanship of African Union, and the international observers will be there to guarantee the independent nature of these talks. But they probably would take place in El Fasher, the capital of Darfur. I think it's there's some ideas now developing in Abuja talks. Well, for the whole Sudan, of course, not only about the Darfur, the implementation of North-South peace agreement remains a challenge. As said, it's a very slow process. There are new areas of conflict. The Eastern Sudan, as mentioned, for this Asmara and Eritrea might stay a problem or come even a worse problem. Lord Resistance Army in the south remains a problem. How to catch these people, how to deal with them. Darfur peace agreement and its implementation will be a challenge. The UN operation, the blue-hatted AMIS going to under the UN umbrella now in these circumstances where there are tendencies to make UN as an enemy on the ground. I learned from Jan Pronk that there has been first cases where local workers who are working for UN has been mistreated by people who are saying you have to quit the job, you are not allowed to work for the UN. This is exactly the story what happened in Iraq. I was working for UN in Baghdad for some time, and in Basra and others. There was the local people who were working for UN were scared by others. And then the equal sharing of the wealth. I'm always confused when I'm going to Khartoum, and I think I'm going to one of the poorest countries of the world, and you see these new skyscrapers coming up and a huge wealth in Khartoum, and then you go to the other places where there's absolutely nothing. So you see that the oil money stops in Khartoum, and there's not the equal share of the wealth. What can we do as international community? We of course have to continue our humanitarian assistance as long as it's needed. Hopefully this can be done, and government of Sudan will not create new problems for international community. There's a huge need for development cooperation, maybe a pledging conference for Darfur when the peace agreement is there. We can work through the non-governmental organizations. Many of them are active there on the ground. From the European Union side, we have been supporting the African Union AMIS peacekeeping and police operations, and if the blue hatting will happen, we will continue that towards UN, of course. Supporting of the Abuja peace process as long as it will take. Hopefully there's an end somewhere, maybe in April, maybe in May, we will get some outcomes from Abuja. And of course pressure the parties to comply with peace agreements. I think the worst case scenario is that we have a peace agreement which nobody is following, and there's a weak peacekeeping operation on the ground which cannot pressure the parties to do it. And then who will be blamed then? So it's better to now plan the proper peacekeeping operation as well. And this was taken from this Russian helicopter window, but from my mind it's something like light in the end of the tunnel or something like that. Thank you.
Pekka, thank you so much and I really appreciate the comprehensiveness of the review of all of the issues. I think people come away with a clear understanding of the complexity of everything. I'd like to get things, at least I'll raise the first subject and then turn to the audience for any questions that people might have. To me, I've never been supremely confident, frankly, about the way the whole negotiation on Sudan has evolved, because it has seemed to me that sort of the classic case of the belligerent parties or the leaders responding to a set of external pressures without at any point really building any sense of common enterprise and any trust, any confidence among the key players. And that's the one issue that's not listed up there, is that issue of trust and mutual confidence, a sense of common enterprise. We had Salim was here and described in some vivid detail the challenges of facilitating the Abuja talks. You referred to one element of that yourself, and a couple of these individuals that refused to go in the same room with each other, I think even as of this moment. Is there any structure, any process that is trying to deal on a second track basis or any other basis with trying to begin to rebuild relationships, rebuild some trust, and rebuild collaborative capacity among these parties? That is, from my perspective, not to begin with that kind of process is a terrible mistake, and we are setting ourselves up for failure in this fashion.
Well, thank you, Howard. A difficult question, and certainly there has been civil NGO organizations who have been working with the movements and trying to build their capacities and between the breaks or during the breaks of the peace negotiations. I know that there has been some of these capacity building sessions, and also I have to say that in the corridors and in the rooms in Abuja there's a lot ongoing to this direction. But the real difficulty I think has been, or one of the difficulty has clearly been that the key rebel movement, SLM, for maybe many reasons, were never allowed to have its own conference and organize its own house while it was negotiating. We know that there was the conference organized by Minimi in Haskanita, which was, from his perspective, actually a success, because he came a double leader of SLM and was accepted to the table after that conference. But of course, I think if you look a little bit backwards, the mistakes that maybe African Union and we as international partners made, that we could have even more tried to have a unified conference for this movement and try to get them to agree on the leadership. This is one thing, because now they are at some areas in Darfur in the situation that they are almost fighting, having internal fights in the movements. Regarding the overall structure of the negotiation structure from the movement side, between the 6th and 7th round, actually Chad, Libya, Eritrea, and particularly Eritrea played also a constructive role by pushing these movements for a common platform for the negotiations. Actually, this was a good step, because then they came to the 7th round and all of them were there, and so. But the common platform was so paralyzed because they had agreed in N'Djamena, so to say, the minimum and maximum requirements at the same time, which were the same. So we couldn't see any movement from this, and then individually. The movements came out a little bit from this platform, and we could get some movement. But of course, this also broke some of these negotiation structures. And one of the problems clearly is that these movements get their funding and political support from some of the neighboring states, and neighboring states are in this game through the support of the movements. It will be a very difficult challenge, even after the peace deal, then to run the Darfur talks or the reconciliation or form the movements as a political parties. We will see fierce, hopefully peaceful battles then on the political scene in Darfur.
And I would suggest that the same issues relate to the whole North-South implementation. I mean, absent trust, absent any sense of common enterprise, I don't see any reason to believe that this thing will stay on track. I mean, that's the concern that I would pose. Okay, let's turn to the audience. Let's take about 3 questions at a time. We'll package them. Yeah, please.
Doug Brooks with the International Peace Operations Association. I think this was an excellent talk. It was really interesting to see the sort of dynamics going on the ground. I think the big question is can we empower the Africa Union mission enough in light of the fact that there's so much resistance to the UN going in, or certainly something more robust such as NATO. The African Union, I think, is doing a good job as far as it can with 7,000 troops and observers, but it really needs more support. And what you're saying is that there's as many as 34 EU people on the ground, which is great, but from the private sector side, we've got thousands on the ground supporting the mission, and lots more willing to go in if there is the financial support to do that, including security, humanitarian security if necessary. So I mean, there's a lot of options here. In terms of supporting the African Union with more money, with more resources, and so on. I'd like to hear if the EU has any plans to do that.
Okay. Let's take a couple other questions first.
Yeah.
Okay. Over here on the left, and then down here.
Roman Spack. I have a question about Chad and Sudan. Considering the very problematic relationship that Chad and Sudan have had throughout history in terms of the role each other play in proliferating conflict in the bordering state. The current situation in Chad, how much is it of concern to the EU, and what are the efforts being done on the ground to try to sort of guide the implosion of Chad or prevent the conflict from migrating to Darfur, from Darfur into Chad, and then, staying there and then back into Darfur? Thank you.
Thank you. Could you identify both your name and your affiliations, please? Right over here.
Thank you very much. I'm from Sudan Embassy. I would like just to say, concerning your remarks about the ICC and that the Sudanese government officials are asking whether they are in the list or not. I mean, the list has been handed to Sudan, and it was to the UN, and everybody knows what is there. The question is not just being in the list or not. Sudan government position is very clear that there is no impunity for whoever have committed atrocities in Darfur. Our differences with the ICC is that at this time, opening such an issue is going to inflame the conflict in Darfur rather than being rather than contributing to his solution. The second is concerning the UN troops. Sudan government position is very clear that at this time Sudan is not accepting UN troops in Darfur. Why? Initially we have accepted UN troops in the south after we reached an agreement. We think that having a UN troops now in Darfur is going to be part of the problem rather than part of the solution. You have seen here demonstrations in Niala, which is in the capital of Darfur. There are demonstrations in many places in Sudan. So in such hostile environment, is it wise to have, at this time, to have a UN troop in Darfur? If there is anything happens to these troops, isn't it the government of Sudan is going to be blamed? Now there are so many blames on the government of Sudan. Are you sure that the rebels are going to accept that? Are you sure that the people in Darfur are accepting that? We think that after we reach an agreement, peace agreement, whereby all the parties are agreeing to this mission, UN mission in Darfur, then they are going to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Okay. Just one point, please.
I try to get one question per person, but go ahead.
The other point is concerning the authenticity of the picture you have seen now. Is it from the EU? My direct question, is this picture taken from the EU or it is from the press? Because it makes a hell of a difference that if it's taken from the press or by the EU. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Would you like to take those questions?
Okay, thank you. I'm starting with the issue of African Union and AMIS and what kind of support could be given and what is in planning. From European Union, we have we have not so much funding possibilities for military or peacekeeping operations. Everything this has been developed as we go, but we have created this kind of African peace facility, which was there was a common understanding among the 25 member countries that we should have this kind of facility, actually, which could be this kind of money for the rapid reaction to African conflicts. And now it has happened that this African Union AMIS operation actually have been taken almost all funds from this peace facility. If there is another similar request, we are out of funds, and we are actually already running out of funds for this operation. And I think the precondition of the replenishment of these funds or finding some new funds from the European Union is that we know where this mission is going. We wouldn't like African Union AMIS to be a failure on the ground. We need to see maybe better planning. We need to see how the DDR process is planned, how it's organized. There has been some problems with the chain of command. I think we all of us know, and these kind of issues. So it's very important that we see the plans ahead. We have so far been thinking that the African Union March 10th decision of continuing the mission to the September and then blue hatting it or getting it under the UN umbrella will be our financial line that we will support. We will be part of the supporters until it will be blue hatted. If this is not the case, we have seen, of course, for example, the Arab League summit in Khartoum to take place, making some pledges from the Arab countries and so on. But I think this is certainly something that the African Union has to clear what are their exact plans on this. My argument and what we have been saying from the European Union, that if you look for the best possible practices of disarmament and best possible players, UN and DPKO in UN is the one body that has been collected that knowledge and can do it seriously, particularly with the rebels and with such a difficult rebel environment. It will be a long way to African Union to develop it, but I think these are now, there are different ideas from different stakeholders. From our perspective, blue hatting is the way we would like to things go. Then about the Chad-Sudan border issue. It's very difficult to say. My picture from time to time was that both were supporting each other, rebels, and then there was this, of course, saying which people say that Darfur has always been the stepping stone to the power in N'Djamena, and so they are interlinked. And of course, we know that there are tribal issues, Sagawa tribes, that this is over the area, and so on. All these elements are there. But really, we are quite seriously concerned that this conflict will spill over to Chad, or that the Chadian problems, internal problems, have a reflection to Darfur, and then it can go out of the hands. Then we are no more speaking about the conflict in Darfur, but the wider conflict in the region. And therefore, I think this Chad-Sudan agreement in Tripoli was welcomed. That at least there was a mediation by Libya and African Union, and there was an agreement. And I think we have to build on that. I think that is our option now, because there is an agreement on that. Then finally on the question of the ICC and of these different lists and others. Of course, from the European Union perspective, we support the work of the ICC, but we think it should work independently. It should not be guided by anyone. It should actually fulfill its mandate and do its job like it has been doing in the Lord Resistance Army issue. Of course, the UN sanctions are then much more political issue. UN, as you know, the UN Security Council gave the possibility to punish those who are against the peace or are slowing or harming the peace process and so on. And I think this kind of individuals, if we come, for example, to the States, that somebody walks out from the Abuja negotiations and saying, look, I don't like this solution here, I go back to the field and I choose the fighting or something like that. This of course includes the rebels as well. We could then use these individual sanctions against this kind of peace spoilers and put the threat on these people. On the issue of Sudanese ambassador raised up the issue of the how welcome the UN is in Sudan or UN troops. Of course, the UN is certainly in problems if this kind of trend is raising in Sudan, that UN is looked as an enemy, because a lot of humanitarian work and particularly a lot of support in the south is run by the UN agencies and UN work. And as I said, this is certainly the most unwelcomed position for UN to have already a lot of problems on the ground, and then have this kind of mobilization of public opinion against UN or this kind of trends wherever they come from. And I think UN has to think twice. I also have met politicians in Khartoum who said, look, it's our UN. We are part of the UN, so what is the problem? We are also a member of UN. It's not foreign intervention or anything like that. And these are the African Union troops. If it's going to blue hatting, these are the same troops that from the African Union. So what is the problem? But this is a debate in Khartoum, and I think we should somehow engage ourselves positively in this debate, explaining what our role means, explaining there's no Trojan horse called UN bringing something else in to Darfur. But I think, and I'm coming from Khartoum and really with meeting with some Sudanese ministers and Vice President Taha, and I think that has been our message. It's if you have a problem, try to tell exactly what is the problem now here. Let's try to solve it, because the worst scenario also for you is that there is a peace agreement but not proper implementation of the peace agreement. That's my feeling.
Thank you. A question back there.
Thank you.
Would you like some paper to write on?
Thank you. I want to thank the Wilson Center for hosting this, and you for a wonderful presentation. My name is David Rubenstein. I'm with the Save Darfur Coalition. We believe that in the U.S. we've really been able to help the public understand what's happening on the ground in Darfur and about the violence and suffering there. And our government, I think, has responded by supporting financially and in many other ways a peace process and to help end the violence and suffering in Darfur. You've given us a great presentation about what's on the ground and what has to happen long term and what has to happen voluntarily. But as you know, the reality is that there are still people being killed. As we're sitting here in this comfortable setting, there are people dying because they're not being protected by their government. And the African Union, to its credit, has done a wonderful job of trying to protect the people, but they haven't been up to the job. And it seems clear that the United Nations has to provide the protection that the government of Sudan hasn't been able to. And we hope very much that government voluntarily invites the United Nations in, and that will solve some of the problems we just talked about. But right now, that's the only way to provide protection to these people. What do you think has to happen in the international community to build the support to make that as inevitable as Kofi Annan says it is? And fortunately, we hope that the international community will step up to it and that Sudan will welcome them in. Where does that pressure has to come internationally to make that happen?
Thank you. In the back.
Morning. My name is Fatima Abdul Rasul from Citizens for Global Solutions. Thank you for your great presentation. And my question is twofold regarding the role of the international community. Number one, regarding both the fact that the AU and the Arab League held their annual summits in Khartoum, and how that almost downplays what is going on in Darfur. It almost seems like empty words, especially coming from the Arab League, and how the international community can pressure. I mean, both the European Union and the U.S. have allies in both African and Arab countries, and how that can be played a little more in terms of getting some kind of peace in Darfur. Secondly, the role of the United States. I want to know if you've heard or feel in terms of this, some reports talking about the CIA involvement and the CIA cooperation with the Khartoum government on war on terror issues, and how that hinders efforts on getting a comprehensive solution in Darfur. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Right down here.
Thank you. Ashley Kushner from the State Department. In reference to the blue-hatted mission, I'm wondering if how closely the EU is working with DPKO on defining the mandate in terms of numbers of police, numbers of stability police units, which we've actually heard a number which is quite high, and from our perspective makes a lot of sense in terms of the situation. I'm wondering if there's an EU official position on how the mandate will be defined for both the peacekeepers and the police. And unofficially, I'm wondering what level of support do you see countries bilaterally giving to the blue-hatted mission in terms of numbers of CivPol and peacekeepers? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good and very precise questions. I try to survive. First, regarding the question of what the international community can do more, and how to put pressure on to stop killings and stop violence and take this problem seriously. And I think in this debate, of course, there are many kind of references, but some people reference to Rwanda, said that, well, too little, too late, international community didn't act. And by the way, when I have been to Canada in Ottawa, this Rwanda card is playing quite a lot in the domestic debate in Canada, and this kind of frustration that we had already one case in Africa where definitely we had the information but we didn't act and so on. But then you come, of course, this intervention. If you have an unwilling government and this kind of situation, you come to this intervention part, which is very difficult internationally. We have, I've been, of course, in Europe following very much the Sarajevo story and so on. After long talks, then finally international community intervened, and I think we are all happy that it happened finally there. But it was not so easy to get the acts together from the international community. The intervention concept, of course, is very, very difficult to put up and maintain in these kind of circumstances. So I'm not very, let's say, I'm not expecting that even if the killings are ongoing, and even if we have all this information on the daily, international community or pressure towards the international community can go easily to that direction. And this is maybe also to answer to the last question partly, that when we are speaking about this UN Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 mandate, I think all the plans in UN are done now under the Chapter 6 mandate. So it's a mandate where the government is cooperating with the UN operation, the host country, and the country's sovereignty is not challenged in any way by the operation and so on. And this is the base of the current planning. And if there would be another planning, if the peace process fails or if things are getting worse or something like that, it's a totally another debate. But the current planning is done under the Chapter 6, which requires the cooperation with the Khartoum. These troops cannot enter to the country without the full cooperation with the government of Sudan. This is maybe the first part. Then the issue of the Khartoum and hosting the African Union Summit and the Arab League Summit. I was in Khartoum during the African Union Summit, and we had a lot of talks, of course, with the African Union member states. I think I would imagine, I'm coming from the European Union, so I'm imagining that the situation is sometimes a little bit the same, that when you have difficult questions, but you have important member states, like Sudan actually is. It has, as I said, Sudan has a lot of neighbors. These neighbors basically want to keep good contacts with the government of Sudan. Nobody wants to challenge maybe another ally in the same union and so on. You try to find your way to make compromises, and I think African Union did good work in this Khartoum summit to in one way to postponing now the Sudanese presidency of the African Union until the talks are finished in Abuja, and then saying next year is your turn, because we know the effect if it had happened so that Sudan has got the African Union presidency. We know that some of the movements would have walked out from the Abuja negotiations because African Union is the mediator, and then one of the parties would be the presidency of the mediation. It's just not functioning. On the Arab League summit, my people were there. I wasn't myself. I have seen many comments on afterwards on that the Arab League was somehow pledging the help to AMIS, but only then further on in the autumn. Do we have influence to these Arab League or African Union? I think yes, we have. Everybody has talks. Everybody has bilateral talks. Governments, European Union, and others. But I think they make their own decisions. We shouldn't too much try to think that we can manage other people policy. If somebody says that they can manage U.S. policies, I think you wouldn't be very happy. And the same thing is with this African Union. If you say that you should do this, you should do that, it's not going to. It's firing back very, very easily. You have to be very careful. With the CIA's role in Sudan or CIA Sudan cooperation, I don't know anything about. I would love to know, but if you can brief me, I would be happy. Then regarding the final question on the DPKO and our plans, we know that the United Nations plans are very much in the beginning. They are based on the African Union decision on the March 10th, based on the Kofi Annan's and African Union Presidency Conares meetings and so on. And we are a little bit waiting for that. We know that there is a planned assessment mission, which hopefully will take place in Sudan, and I think it's planned in a way that African Union and United Nations would do that planning together, and then inform the partners what is needed. In the European Union, we are staying ready if there are this kind of needs for logistics or airlifting of the troops or technical support or communications or things like that. We are not thinking that too many troops, maybe some specialists if needed, but we are not thinking that European troops are coming to Sudan in this, if the peacekeeping operations will be there. We think that it should be based on African, maybe some Asian contribution if needed. I think we have to understand the realities on the ground, that the so-called white faces, how to say it nicely, are not so much appreciated in these circumstances, and we have our colonial past and some of our member states and all that. I wouldn't like to add this to the problems that already exist on the ground. But on the other hand, as said, Darfur as a region and as an area, the logistical and communication needs and these kind of technical needs are huge. And then I think that our member states and European Union could really support if asked by United Nations.
We have time for one more question. Let's take that.
Thank you. We've Roman Buehler with Universal Human Rights Network. We've heard the position of the government of Sudan that blue hatting is unacceptable, and we're currently not contemplating anything in Sudan that without the cooperation of the government. What kind of incentives do you think that the international community could offer in a positive way to the government so that there can be the security that's needed on the ground so that the human rights community can provide the assistance that's needed to prevent the catastrophe that is happening there in terms of the refugee community. What are the incentives that are going to resolve this disagreement that we've seen right here in this room?
This is a difficult question, and of course in this kind of crisis which lasts long and are these human rights violations, very easily comes this demonizing effect or in the government of Sudan or in Khartoum the feeling that they are painted in a corner in many ways and isolated and all this, but this a lot of psychology is ongoing. I felt that in Khartoum that people don't like when they are pushed, they think too much to some direction, which they think that anyway they are going to. All these psychological factors are there, and of course I think it's very important that we also think how to really get some benefits for those people in Sudan who are for the peace processes. This is, by the way, an issue that some of the observers in Khartoum are saying to us. Look, in Naivasha, Vice President Taha and John Garang made a deal. So the feeling was that now Sudan is getting out of the hook, so to say, the US sanctions and whatever there are, and this didn't happen. So actually this was not maybe very rewarding for those who were working for the peace agreement, because they felt that then came the Darfur. And then the question in Khartoum is, when the Darfur is solved, will it happen that then the Eastern Front, so we are not, so to say, getting out of the hook? And of course, it's a very difficult dynamics, I know, that this is also internal policy in US and in other countries, which is involved in this. But I think issues like dealing with international loans and what World Bank can do and this kind of getting Sudan back to the normal international partners step by step. I think that should be the way we are dealing with the government. When we see progress on this, we see progress with the Naivasha implementation, we see progress in Darfur, and I think that kind of rewarding mechanism should be there. But of course it's very difficult to give to the government of Sudan as such. Of course, is very rich with the oil income. So we are not actually with the development. It's not the government that we can play with the development money or something like that. But I think setting things back to the normality would be a reward to the government in Khartoum in these circumstances.
I want to express my great appreciation to you, Pekka, for being here in Washington today. At the time of the North-South agreement, I think many people were making the point that this ought to be looked at as the beginning of a process, not the end of a process. I think your discussion today of all the many issues that are either unresolved or not even, or having been agreed to, are not yet on the way to implementation, is a validation of that mindset that we're in for a long and difficult and very bumpy process, and that the key from the standpoint of the international community will be both sustained engagement and coordinated engagement. And the closer the United States, the European Union, and our international partners can maintain a common position, the more effective will be the diplomacy, of course. So I want to thank you so much for your contribution to the dialogue today and for everyone who's participated in it.
Thank you. Thank you.
My advisor can help with that. Look forward to seeing you this evening. Welcome. Sharing with you about Great Lakes, some amazing things are happening.
Well, of course, I'm looking at the process. Yeah, I'm looking at the process. Yeah,
this is great.
It's great.
You saw Charlie Snyder in the room. Do you know Charlie Snyder?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I can see.
I kept waiting for him to ask his question. I think he'll do that privately rather than publicly.
Yeah. That's good. Things or maybe Okay, you have a request. Huh? Yeah, it's good.